All right, so on the course site you can see where we have all the things that are on here. Week 1 and Week 2, all the things are due Sunday night. Study terms and the video assignments. There's 2 video assignments, 2 study terms. And then there is the quiz number 1. Now, I've given you until Sunday night, even for the first week, because I know the first week everybody is, especially with a blend, this kind of class where you meet every other time, it gets confusing and you get your books and all that kind of stuff. So everything's due Sunday night. Now, on some of those things, except for the quiz, you can turn it in late, and I see when you turned it in. Okay, because it tells me. It says it was due at 11:55 p.m. and you turned it in at 1 in the morning or whatever. Okay, but for the quiz, I don't really have any control over that. I have to make up the quiz. I have to send it to I don't know what it is, Center for Online Learning or whatever it's called. They actually post it. And then I can't sort of say, well, give them an extra couple hours. They have a start time and they have a finish time. Start time is right now. You can start it right now if you want it. And then once you open it up, you'll have 10 minutes. 10 minutes to do the quiz. Then it will shut down. There's only 5 questions. So, okay, it's just 5 questions. There are 5 multiple choice questions. So I think you'll have plenty of time. Usually when I do this in class, even in class where I'm handing out, picking it up, I usually get it done in like 5 minutes, maybe 6 minutes, all that. I mean, it doesn't take very long. So I think if you're at your computer and you're ready to go, make sure you're ready to go before you open it. And then just know you got it'll tell you, but I think it'll have a little clock ticking down. But I just want you to know before you open it the first time, you got 10 minutes. Now the other thing with this is you'll notice down here it says Respondus Lockdown Browser. What this does, we're going to do all our quizzes and tests on your own, not in here. So in order to make that fair and a little bit of security on that, so that you're not making this a group thing, this Respondus thing, and when you click on that quiz the first time, it's going to have you download a browser called Respondus. Not Google Chrome, not whatever you use, Foxfire, whatever you guys use. It'll be the Respondus thing. And that's what you have to do the quiz and the test in. Otherwise, it's not. Why? The Respondus browser does not let you have multiple windows open. In fact, it'll probably tell you to close down your other browser, or it'll know. I don't know how they do that. It's like Big Brother watching you, basically. So basically, what that means is once you open that, you can't open like another window and go out and Google and search answers. That's basically what it is. Okay. It also turns on. So I want you to know this. It turns on your webcam. So be sure when you're taking this that you are, you don't have to be dressed up, but make sure you are dressed. Okay? Okay? Yeah, well, I recommend that you, have a shirt on or whatever. Just know that the webcam comes on. I mean, the little light will come on. It tells you all this ahead of time, but I just want you to be prepared the first time, okay? It's going to turn on your webcam, and it's going to turn on your microphone for those 10 minutes, or until you close it, till you're done. So for that 5 or 10 minutes, however long you're in there, that's happening, and it's recording you.
So does someone review that webcam? Like, someone review
They can. They can. So in other words, I guess I can, and I don't know who else can. Basically, the idea is if I think, well, just like I'm standing, just pretend that when you're doing this, you're in this room. So whatever you would do if I was standing here and everybody else is here in the room, be sure that you are clothed to that point that you wouldn't mind other people seeing you. So don't, this is not like your bedroom and nobody can see you or whatever. Just know that. And the other thing is, watch what you say, because I'll be able to hear it, other people will be able to hear it. So, you know, the other reason they do that is just so we know there's not like 2 or 3 of you standing there and you're doing the quiz together. We'll know if there's multiple people in the room, people are talking to you, or if you're on the phone talking to somebody or looking stuff up on your phone because you can't look it up on your laptop. I don't want to give you any ideas, but that's what it's looking for. Okay? So basically, just think of it as a way that it lets you take the test or quiz without setting up a time and going to the testing center. That would be my other choice. Everybody have to go over there and do it, which is kind of a hassle. Okay? Yeah.
Okay, do we have to be like in a private room where there's nobody? I know my husband does MBA and like
Yeah.
he has to be like in a really private room and I can't really like walk by or anything.
That I don't know. I've got a form. I got the directions that they sent me. I'm going to be emailing those to you, okay, after class, and I'll post them on this site. But I've never done it. I don't know. My guess is probably you want it to be a quiet room.
Okay. And then is it open notes or?
And you also want to know anybody else who is in the class, or anybody else is in your house or whatever. They know this camera is recording. So in other words, they don't come walking by behind you in some way they wouldn't want people to see.
Okay.
That might be the reason why you might want to go to close the door in a room or something, or just say, for the next 10 minutes, don't bother me.
And then is it open notes?
It is not open notes. Okay? So look over your notes ahead of time, and then it's only 5 multiple choice questions. So what I would recommend is you look over like what we said here in class, the notes you take, and then I posted a thing on Egypt Thursday last or what is today? This is Thursday. Tuesday I posted Egypt. Last Thursday I talked about Mesopotamia. So there'll be 3 lectures that could be included on this quiz. So you'll want to watch that other video, take notes or whatever, because mostly those quizzes are based upon what is said in class and the PowerPoints. But my other point is that needs to be done by Sunday night.
This Sunday?
But yes, this Sunday night by 11:59. I don't know if once you open it you have 10 minutes, but don't cut it short. So at least start by 11:50 or so, to take it. Yes.
So on the videos I haven't watched yet, show the PowerPoint.
This video is a different video assignment, and it's not me. Let me show you like this one, Ancient Egypt. That will take you to a YouTube, and this is me. See that? All right. So you can watch that on your own, and you can see it lasts about an hour. Okay? Does that make sense? So that's what I plan to do if I can't get everything covered in here because we only meet once. I cover some stuff in the other section and some in this, and then I just post it. Then you can watch it anytime you want. It's posted on YouTube, but I make a link here. Yes?
And how many attempts do we have for it?
1. 1 attempt. 1 attempt. The questions will be randomized as well. Now that shouldn't matter to you unless you're trying to figure out what the answers are from somebody else. Somebody else already took it and then they tell you. So I would just tell you up front that they mix up the questions and answers. So in other words, if somebody says, oh, the answer's all A's, and so you go on there and put all A's, that's probably not going to go well for you. Okay? So basically, this is just a way to try to keep us all honest, but you can still do it on your own in your own time. So, does that make sense? All right. No questions there? Okay, let me pause this and we'll start the other. Okay, today we're going to talk about the Hebrews and the later history of Mesopotamia. Okay? So remember, last This is Thursday, right? Last Thursday, I talked about Mesopotamia. I recorded that in here, and I put it up so that the other class could hear it, or you could go back and listen to it again if you'd like. You know, if you have insomnia and you want to have me conk you out. Then on Tuesday, I talked about ancient Egypt in the other section of the class, and I posted that. I just showed you where that is. And so now today, I'm going to talk about the Hebrews and later history of Mesopotamia. So for those of you who are very familiar with the Bible, this should be an easy review. If you're not, then welcome to a real short introduction to biblical history. But we want to start then. We're going to pick it up with the patriarchal period. We'll pick it up with Abraham. We talked about Abraham when I talked about Mesopotamia in this class last Thursday. When is the patriarchal period? What I'm trying to do is, sometimes we talk about things. We talk about patriarchs, we talk about Abraham, we talk about Solomon, talk about these people. But when did they live? And how does it relate to what we're doing in this class? Okay? How does it relate to Mesopotamian history, Egyptian history? That's really what the next 15 screens are about. So it's not very long. But a lot of stuff in here. Okay. Well, the patriarchal period then is the earliest I think anyone puts Abraham is about 2160 BC. 2160. Some people do put him later. Some people put him as late as maybe 1950 BC. So I'm not here to argue about the exact date of Abraham, but I tend to put him around 2100, 2150. And then the end of the patriarchal period, I think most people agree, was around 1800 BC. Okay? Give or take a few years. So who are we talking about? We're talking about the patriarchs. We're talking about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Okay? At least those, right? Right? So Abraham is the first of the patriarchs. They're called the patriarchs because these are the early leaders of the Hebrews. We could call them Hebrews at this point. You know that in the Bible it talks about coffee, and it says that men should only make it Hebrews. No, it's just Hebrews. Never mind. That was a joke for those of you listening on YouTube. It didn't go well. Okay. So you remember the story. I hope you remember the story because we can't go through all the stories. But Abraham comes, remember we talked about last time, from Mesopotamia, and he moves into what today would be Palestine, and then eventually he goes over and visits Egypt. Remember that? Well, anyway, it's there in the Bible. Read the Bible. Now, Isaac is his son. We'll talk a little more about this in a moment. But then Isaac has several sons. He has Jacob. Jacob then has lots of sons, and the brothers, remember they pull a kind of a dirty deed on Joseph. Remember that? They pretend he was the father's favorite, and so they pretended he was dead. Right? Remember that? And they sold him to be a slave, and he was taken to Egypt. All right. That's what then leads to the next big period we might talk about is bondage or slavery in Egypt. When did that start? Well, I got a question mark there because people do debate it. But about the earliest anyone would put it would be about 1640 BC. When does it end? People always also debate that. I have 1446. That's the early date for the Exodus. There is a later date I will mention in a moment. So let me just tell you this. When it comes to the Exodus, there's sort of three views, I guess. Or maybe four. We'll say four. We'll be very inclusive. One view is it didn't happen at all. There was no Exodus. Right? They don't believe any of it. All right. The other view is that it happened very early on, and it happened in 1446. The other view is that it happened a bit later than that, the late date, which would be around 1270. And then another view would be is that it's not, I don't really call it really an exodus because they never were in Egypt. They said they just moved from Mesopotamia into Palestine. So those kind of four views. I sort of go with the early date. You don't have to go with the early date if you don't want to, but let me present, I'm going to present the early date and the late date, and then you decide, I guess. And you can look up the other ones. We don't have time to go through. We can spend a long time talking about the date of the Exodus, but we will do survey here. Now, of course, when we get to the time of in Egypt, they're in slavery, and of course, one of the main characters then becomes a guy named Moses. I'm sure you've heard of Moses, right? Moses, if you remember the story, Moses was born at a time, it says in the Bible, there arose a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph. Because Joseph had a good relationship with the Pharaoh. In fact, he was very high up in the chain of command. So you remember that? So when his brothers show up and his father shows up because of a drought in Israel, in Palestine, they don't know who he is. He knows who they are. And then once they figure out who he is, they're afraid, but he forgives them. And basically they get welcomed to come and stay in Egypt, and they do, and they go and they lived in the land of Goshen. The land of Goshen is in the northern part of Egypt in the Nile Delta. If you don't know where that is, you have to go listen to the video I recorded on Tuesday, okay? But we did some of the geography of Egypt then. All right, so when Moses is born, it's a time when a new pharaoh, a new dynasty has come. Question is, which dynasty? Well, I don't know. We won't argue that at this point. But at any rate, Moses then, his mother, to save his life, because they were getting too many slaves, too many Hebrews, and they got worried about the population growth of the Hebrews. So they sent out a decree. First they wanted the midwives, when they were giving, help the woman give birth, they wanted them to kill the babies right when they were first born. The women wouldn't do it. The midwives didn't want to do it. They didn't do it. And so that wasn't working. And so then there's just a decree, we're just going to go and kill especially the male children. They're going to be executed, especially babies. So they're going to send soldiers in to do it. The midwives won't do it. So when Moses' mother hears this, she weaves a little basket for him, floats him in the Nile, wraps him in a blanket, floats him, and then pushes him so that he's going to go. She sees where the Pharaoh's daughter, and remember the Pharaohs could have many wives, therefore many children and many daughters, that she finds the baby. And of course, she loves the baby, and she takes the baby and raises it as her own. Okay, that's Moses. So for 40 years, Moses is raised like he's a prince of Egypt. All right? He's raised in the household of the Pharaoh, the most powerful person in the world at that time. The ancient world would have been the Pharaoh. He was in that household. Wealthy, powerful, and educated that way. Then remember, when he gets to about the age of 40, Moses figures out somewhere along in there that he is a Hebrew and he's a slave, or he was a slave, or his mother was a slave, or whatever. And he gets very kind of angry, and he sees an Egyptian abusing, whipping, beating a Hebrew slave, and he gets very angry, and he starts to fight with a guy, and the guy dies. So he kills an Egyptian, and then he runs. Okay, he's a fugitive. He takes off. He don't want to stick around. So he heads off to, basically, most people believe, the Sinai Peninsula, the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula, and he becomes a shepherd. We say he's a shepherd for 40 years. So we can divide his life into 40-year periods. Then the last 40 years, of course, this is when he gets famous. Most part of the Bible that talks about Moses talks about this part, is he's out watching the sheep, and then he sees the burning bush. Yes?
So why did he have to leave? He was like in the royal family.
Yeah.
Even though he killed an Egyptian, he's still in the royal family.
Yeah, that's a good question. Why did he have to flee if he's in the royal family? It could be that there's a lot of politics in the royal family. The rumors might be out that he wasn't really the real daughter of I don't know. We're not told. But whatever it was, Moses felt like he was in danger, and it could have been that he had found us out. Could be other people already knew it and could have just been his guilt. A lot of times when you do something wrong, you just want to hide it.
Or like,
You want to get away.
can it be like kind of related to the code of Hammurabi? Is that
The Code of Hammurabi.
eye for an eye?
Well, they're not following the Code of Hammurabi here, but they have similar laws. One of the things we find is sort of universally around the world, killing somebody is usually considered wrong. Whether they've got, the Bible or the Code of Hammurabi or whatever, taking someone's life usually results in at least punishment of some kind. So whatever it was, Moses felt like he couldn't stay. Maybe he didn't want to stay because he didn't want to see all the trouble. Maybe he didn't want to stay, certainly because he killed the guy, and he was not sure what was going to happen to him. So he takes off. He's hiding. Then he's out there being a shepherd. He actually gets married, by the way. And then he sees this burning bush that's not consumed. According to tradition, that's in the southern part of Sinai. I've been down there where there's a monastery down there, a monastery of St. Catherine's Monastery, near the mountain that people say is Mount Sinai, where these events took place. In fact, in the monastery, they showed me the bush. They said, "This is the bush." Now, is it the bush? I don't know. But there was a bush, and I was tall enough I could reach up and touch it. So I've touched the bush. I wasn't supposed to touch it. I confess I shouldn't have touched the bush, but I did. Okay, so then he is sent back to Egypt. You might see why he would be reluctant to go back, right? And then he becomes the leader, and he actually has to go and challenge the Pharaoh. Now, since he grew up in the household of the Pharaoh, this was not the same Pharaoh, probably, that many 45 years later. But undoubtedly, Moses would have known this guy. They would have probably been children together, or been in the same household. Yes.
How old was Moses? 4 years of 4 years.
Mm-hmm. When he dies, they say he's 120. 120. Yeah. That's what's recorded in the Bible. 40 years in Egypt, 40 years a shepherd, 40 years wandering in the desert. And then he dies over in what today would be Jordan, up on Mount Nebo, looking over to the promised land. God does not let him go in. So God kept him alive, I guess, so he could see the promise. He did see it, but he couldn't enter it. All right. So I refer you to the Bible department for more on that. But let's talk about the date of the Exodus, because one thing that, certainly this relates to history definitely, is when did the Exodus happen? You see, when did the Exodus happen? This is a watershed of biblical chronology. Whatever you think about the Exodus shapes what you think about the Old Testament. Does that make sense? In other words, if you don't think it happened at all, that's going to definitely shape what you think about the Old Testament. If you say, "Oh, there was no Exodus," well, that means you're going to doubt a whole lot of stuff in the Old Testament, right? You're going to doubt that. And when it happened is very important, because that sets the date for when all of the stuff that happens, for example, the wandering for 40 years, the coming in and conquering the land, and then having the period of the judges, and then establishing the kings, Saul, David, and Solomon. All that chronology can be affected by what you think of the Exodus. All right. Like I told you, today I'm going to talk about two possibilities, an early date and a late date. All right? You don't have to agree with me, but I think you need to know this evidence so that you are informed when you start to look at this. All right? The early date. How do we get to the early date? I can point you to a verse. 1 Kings 6:1. 1 Kings 6:1 is talking about the dedication of Solomon's temple. Now we know pretty closely, I think, almost exactly when Solomon's temple was built, because we have other records coming the other way from Mesopotamia. By the time we get to the kings of David and Solomon, we have records coming from Mesopotamia that help us set the date for that. The date for the dedication of the temple is 966, or depending on, since they have a lunar calendar, it might be 967 BC. Now in that verse, you can read it for yourself. We're not going to read it in here. It mentions 480 years. Basically, they're dedicating it, and they're saying, oh, look where we've come. Look how far we've come. 480 years ago, we entered the land. Okay, we left Egypt, and we started on this journey, and now, 480 years later, we have dedicated this great temple to Yahweh, to God. So that's sort of the context. You can read it for yourself, but that's sort of what they're saying. Look how far we've come in 480 years. And that's how they mention it. So, 480 plus 966, pretty simple math, gets you 1446 or 1447. Now, people who say this isn't right, they have to do something with that 480 years. They have to say it's symbolic. It doesn't really mean 480 years. It means 12 generations of 40 years each or something like that. It means a long time. So if that is correct, then if we look at Egyptian history, that would make Thutmose III the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Okay? Pharaoh of the Exodus, Thutmose III. We mentioned him on Tuesday, so when you watch that video, you'll find out a little more about Thutmose III and his sort of stepmother, Hatshepsut, who gave him a hard time. Anyway, okay? So that's the early date. What about the late date? Let's move to that. Everybody ready? Let's move to the late date. Now, the late date takes the 480 as not literal, as symbolic. I guess that's the best way to put it. In other words, they don't think the 480 years means exactly 480 years. They think it means a long time, or many generations, something like that. Okay? I told you I go with the late date. I go with the early date. You can go with the late date if you want. It just seems to make sense to me, although a lot of people would not agree with me. But I'll just tell you that's my view, just so you know up front. Okay? But I try to present the other as fairly as I can. Now, that being the case, when do they place the Exodus? They place it roughly around 1270 BC. How do they come up with that date? They come up with that date a couple different ways, but the main way is this stele. You see this stele right here? Pictured? It's a large black stone, diorite, I believe it's made out of. And you can see symbols up at the top of the gods. This happens to be a stele that dates to the reign of Pharaoh Merneptah. Merneptah is the son of Ramses II, or Ramses the Great. And again, when you go back and watch that video, you'll know who Ramses the Great is. We mentioned him on Tuesday. At any rate, Merneptah stele here. If you look way down at the bottom here, you'll see a part that's kind of shiny, a different color right here. That's the part everybody's interested in. Because that's the part that mentions Israel. If you were looking for the Egyptian references to Israel in all of Egyptian inscriptions and literature that we have, you're looking at it right there. That's the only mention of Israel we have. Now, some people say, well, I'm surprised. Why don't lots of Egyptian records mention the Exodus? This doesn't mention the Exodus. What this mentions is that Merneptah went to Palestine and he defeated a whole list of people. He subdued them, including the people of Israel. Okay, so this means Israel was already in formation in 1220 when Merneptah went there. There's a people of Israel. Okay? Now, that'll work with the early date or the late date, I guess. But the late date is saying that this has happened very shortly after the Exodus took place. That's why it uses the word people instead of nation. Okay? Anyway, this would make Ramses II the Great, the Pharaoh of the Exodus. I think I've got another picture of this stele. By the way, I'll make another confession. I wasn't supposed to take a picture of this. Well, let's just say I obtained a picture of it and a close-up of it. Because this is the part, here in this close-up, this kind of shiny part that looks more black, that is the actual hieroglyphs that mentions Israel. And why is it shiny? Because so many people have touched it. People have rubbed it. They made rubbings of it and stuff like that. Because that's what they're very interested in. It's the only mention in Egyptian literature of Israel. And some people and students have said, well, why wouldn't they mention the Exodus? That's a big deal if this whole army was destroyed. I will tell you, if you read through all the Egyptian stuff, the Egyptians never lost. In other words, the Egyptians do not record bad stuff. They don't put it officially on a stele. Doesn't mean bad stuff didn't happen. They're just not going to record it. Let's take, for example, former President Bill Clinton. We've got an inauguration tomorrow, right? Bill Clinton had some things happen during his presidency that I won't go into here. Well, let's just say if Bill Clinton was writing his official history, and if somebody else was writing his official history, certain things might be left out or emphasized that the other one wouldn't. Okay? Same way here with the Egyptians. They are not going to mention when they lost. They're not going to mention when something bad. They're certainly, I would say if you found an inscription that mentioned the Exodus and that all these people died, I can tell you that immediately Egyptologists say it's fake. Why? Because there's no Egyptian records that show the Egyptians being defeated, certainly of that magnitude. No, they don't even mention it. They always are victorious. They're always glorious. They always win. Okay? So, this is the Merneptah stele is the only mention of Israel in any Egyptian text. So that's definitely a fact. Why? Well, that's, I suppose, for you to ponder. Right? Why? I think it's because they don't show defeats. They're not going to mention slaves anyway. Slaves don't really get mentioned. And then if the slaves did do what it says in the Bible, they were able to leave and have the Egyptian army destroyed in the process, that's not something they're going to highlight, right? That's not going to be on their highlight reel. Okay. Like if you watch a sports team, give the highlight reel, they don't put the time, like when the guy fell down and when they lost by 30 or whatever. Okay? So I put the circle there around where that is. So I took that picture for you, so you would see it, because I don't know, you've probably not been to the museum in Cairo and maybe not planning a trip there anytime soon. But if you do get to Cairo, you must go to the Archaeological Museum. Otherwise, just don't tell me you went, because you need to go. You see King Tut stuff, you can see this. It's one of the greatest museums in the world. Well, there you have it. Let's move on. Yeah, that's where it is. There it is. There it is. Okay. Now let's move back to later history. So again, where you set the Exodus then sets the whole period of the Judges. See, if you make the Exodus like they're saying here in 1270, most everybody agrees that Saul is around 1050. Again, that's a rounded off date. But that means you only have about 225 years for everything to happen during the period of the Judges. Yes?
Why are they going from
That's because we're BC. They're all BC. So the further back all right, now our dates get bigger, right? We would say from 1995 to 2005. But if you go back before the birth of Christ, all the numbers get bigger as you get further back. Okay? So we're saying here it starts roughly 1400 years before the birth of Christ. It ends around 1050 before the birth of Christ. So that's why it looks backwards, because of BC dates. Okay, that's a good question. So basically, during this period, if you take the early date, as I tend to do, then you've got from 1406. Remember, 1447, 1446, you leave Egypt. You wander for 40 years, get you 1406. And then we know that the time of Saul is around 1050. So it gives you that much time. It gives you like 350 years for all the period of the conquest and the judges to take place. Otherwise, if you take the late date of the Exodus, you've got to compress that into about 230 years. Now, the only way that's going to work, I can tell you, is if you say that there were multiple judges serving at the same time. Now, if you're going to take the Bible seriously and say that we had all these different judges, Gideon and Samuel and Deborah and so forth, that they're going to have to be ruling at the same time in different parts of Palestine. They can't be ruling sequentially. There's not enough time. Okay? Anyway, again, that's probably for another class. But I think it's important for you to hear this in the context of a history class so that you see how perhaps we can tie together Egypt and Mesopotamian history into the Bible. And certainly you can. All right, the United Monarchy then roughly is around 1050 to 931. Most people agree on these dates. Okay, by the time you get to this. So what is the United Monarchy? I remember I had a term I put on there, instead of United Monarchy, you put United Kingdom. And I had one of those terms you're supposed to define as United Kingdom. And some student, I won't say who or where, but a student started to write about Britain and Scotland and stuff like that. So remember that the terms are in the context of the chapter that you're studying. I know what the guy did. He went, I said it was a guy. A student went to Google and he just typed in United Kingdom and he just copied down whatever it said. He's not even thinking about the chapter. He's not even thinking about what we're doing. He starts writing down, the United Kingdom, it's Great Britain and England and Scotland and Wales. He starts listing all this stuff. And I'm like, how can you possibly do? We're talking about ancient Israel. We're talking about ancient Egypt. How can you be talking about the United Kingdom, that United Kingdom? So sometimes I will use United Kingdom because people do. Also could call it United Monarchy. And that is Saul, David, Solomon. Okay? Those are the only three kings that rule over a united kingdom of Israel. Okay? Because after that it's divided north and south. Right? That's what I mean. Saul, David, Solomon. So there's a judge, remember? The people call out and they say, oh, we want a king. And so God says, basically, you don't really need a king, but okay, I'll give you a king. And so he gives them Saul. And then they start having a lot of troubles with that. Then David, right? And then Solomon. All right, Solomon's the one who has the temple built. David wants to build it, God won't let him, basically. He makes all the preparations, he gets a lot of the material ready, and then his son Solomon builds it. Okay? We don't have time to go through their whole lives, but there you have it. Now, by the time you get to Solomon, it's really the largest territory that Israel will control or have influence over during the reign of Solomon. He's very wealthy, very wise, at least in some parts of his life. Some parts of his life, he's not as wise, it seems. But at any rate, he's very wise, he's very wealthy, he's very influential. He actually gets the Phoenicians just to the north in Lebanon to really be his navy. Israel doesn't have a navy. They use Phoenician sailors, colonies. The Phoenicians had several colonies around Mesopotamia or around the Mediterranean. And they're also the ones who invented the alphabet that we use. I just wanted to mention that. It's in your textbook as well. But there is a relationship there, and you might have read, the Queen of Sheba comes to visit him. A lot of talk about that. That's from the southern part of Arabia and East Africa. Those were kind of merged together. The kingdom of Saba. Anyway, we don't have time to talk about that either. But Queen of Sheba, that's his time too. Oh, here's a picture of David and Goliath. I put that up there for fun. Well, unless you're Goliath, it's not fun. But for David, maybe it was fun. I don't know. Anyway. And by the way, the sling, I remember when I was a kid, they would say, oh, he shot him with a slingshot. Right? And so I thought of like those little toy things. We had a little thing, you'd shoot like little peas and stuff. A sling was a real weapon. It was a military weapon. It was a hunting weapon as well. So David was using a real weapon, even though he was a boy. And shepherd boys would have this to defend the sheep from wild animals and so forth. Okay, but there would be whole divisions within an army. It would be slingers. So you imagine, let's say 50 guys with slings, and they all release their stones at the same time, right? The sling stones. and you got 50 of those things coming at you, all of them about the size of a tennis ball, coming at maybe 100 miles an hour, that could kind of mess up your day. Okay? Those are real weapons. It's not a toy. That's what I mean. Okay. Well, here is a map that just shows us, for one thing, the route of the Exodus is in red. Mount Sinai, you see down there at the bottom. And then they come up and they wander. They try to enter the land from the south, and basically a bunch of them say, we can't take them, they're giants, and then he makes them wander for 40 years. And then they cross over to the other side into what today would be Jordan, and they come up to this point where the arrow is there, and that's where Moses dies. After that, Joshua takes over. They cross just north of the Dead Sea, the Jordan River. They go in and do the conquest. They have the period of the judges. Then they end up with the kingdom, with its capital in Jerusalem. Then the divided kingdom comes with Samaria as the capital and Jerusalem as the capital in the south. So a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. Let's talk about that. The divided monarchy. In the north, it's called Israel. In the south, by the way, it's called Judah. There are 10 of the 12 tribes. Remember, there are 12 tribes of Israel. Again, we're not going to go through all that, but there are 10 tribes. They are affiliated or associated with the north. 10 tribes in the north. Their capital is at the city of Samaria. By the way, if you go with me on the dig, we're going to be very close to Nazareth. That's where we'll be digging. See Nazareth up there in the north? The hometown of Jesus, right? Near Nazareth is the excavation that I'm going to this summer. Well, anyway. Now, the north is noted for being having apostasy, that is, doing stuff they shouldn't do, right? Serving false gods. They also tended to intermarry. They married women who were from other tribes, other areas, and who worshipped other gods, and that influenced them and the children and all that sort of thing. Okay? So that's what, certainly in the Bible, now what we're not going to talk a lot about in here is that after the time of the divided kingdom, you then have the prophets, right? You have the major prophets and the minor prophets. The minor prophets were all under 18. That's why they're called the minor prophets. No. See, I always have to explain. They say if you have to explain your jokes that, it's not working. I'm just used to them not working. No, the minor prophets means that they're shorter books. The major prophets mean there's 5 major prophets. They're longer books, right? Like Isaiah and so forth, Jeremiah. Then the shorter prophets like Obadiah and Malachi and that kind of stuff. Okay, it's 12 of them. Now, the one thing, if you're going to study the prophets, and I certainly recommend you do, that one of the first things you want to identify when you're looking at a prophet is, are they affiliated with the north or the south? See, are they from the north or the south, and are they talking to people from the north or the south? That's a very important thing to know if you're studying the prophets, and we're not going to go through and delineate all that for you here. But that's when you begin, or when you do study the prophets, that's one thing you really want to consider. Is this a prophet from Judah, and he's talking to people of Judah, or is this a prophet of Judah talking to people of Israel? Or a prophet from the area of Israel talking to people of Israel, or whatever. Okay, so that's your audience. The audience is always important when you're reading any text, but certainly the Bible. Who is the person speaking? What is their background? And then who are they addressing? Who's the main, people, contemporary people they're talking to? All right. Now, what happens to the northern tribes? The northern tribes, the northern kingdom of the 10 tribes, they actually get deported by the Assyrians. By the Assyrians in the 8th century, in 722 BC. Why? Because the Assyrians had come in and basically had them under their thumb, and they were making them pay tribute money, and when they stopped paying that money and they began to rebel against them, the Assyrians just came in and wiped them out. Now, they didn't kill everybody. They killed the leaders, they killed some of them, and then they deported them. That is, they took the main leaders and they moved them elsewhere. This was an Assyrian practice. In fact, taking the leaders from one area and moving them to another area, and then taking leaders from some other area and moving them there. Why? The people aren't going to listen to these new leaders. You don't have to kill all of them, but and basically, no, they kind of moved them to what today would be the northern part of Iraq. Yes?
Are the Assyrians from Syria?
The Assyrians are, some of them are from Syria. The heart of Assyria is Mesopotamia, which would today be Iraq. But they would also control areas that today would be Syria. Yeah. But they're not just in Syria. However, you are right. If you've read, and I don't know if you've read, there are apocryphal, or the Apocrypha, right? The Apocrypha has Maccabees in it. I don't know if you ever heard of 1st and 2nd Maccabees. 1st and 2nd Maccabees talks about Syrians. Sometimes, some translations, they call them Syrians. Those are not these Assyrians. In fact, those are Hellenistic rulers. We'll get to Alexander the Great later. But those would be Seleucids. Okay, Seleucids are the Syrians of the Maccabees. Well, we'll talk about that, I think, when we get to Alexander the Great. Okay? Well, at least I should. If not, remind me. But yeah, no, Assyrians are not just from Syria, or what today we would call Syria. They would primarily be from what today we would call Iraq. But also, they would have territory into Syria. And they end up controlling, going all the way down into Egypt and Palestine as well. All right, they deport them in 722. Then, since the northern tribes already had a history of intermarriage and of following false gods, what happens to those 10 tribes? They're sometimes called the 10 lost tribes of Israel. And there's all kinds of theories people come up about it. Some of them say they went to England and formed England. I don't believe that myself. Some people have said that. Some people have said that they got on boats and they sailed down the Red Sea and they came all the way across to South America, and then they became the population of native people in South and North America. The Mormons would say that in the Book of Mormon. That's how they explain people got here, or got to these continents, and the connection to Israel, these 10 lost tribes. I personally don't buy that either. So what do I think happens to the 10 lost tribes? I think the 10 lost tribes intermarried with other people. We know they were moved to the northern part of what today would be Iraq. They intermarried. They lost their identity. They never come back to Palestine. So therefore they're lost, because we don't hear about them anymore. Okay? That's what I think happened. You can make up your mind. There are different theories out there. Okay? But that's what they're called. They're sometimes called the 10 lost tribes. All right, let's talk about the southern kingdom then, briefly. The southern kingdom, obviously, is in the south. It's called Judah. Judah. And it's only 2 tribes. There are only 2 of the 12 tribes there. Now, they had their trouble with apostasy themselves, but they tended to remain a little more faithful than the north. Their capital's here in Jerusalem. By the way, here's a picture I took, which I was allowed to take, of the Western Wall, or some people call it the Wailing Wall. There's the Dome of the Rock you see up there in the corner. That's the Golden Dome. And then there are people standing down here. They are praying next to the wall. There are cracks in the wall. People take little prayers and they stick it in the wall. Like take a piece of paper and write it, and they fold it up and they stick it in there. I guess, you can even now send your message with a fee. I don't know what the fee is. But you could send your prayer and supposedly someone will take it, print it out your email or whatever it is, fold it up and take it there and stick it in the wall for you. For, I don't know, $20. I don't know how much it costs. You can look it up. This was a few years ago. I'm sure you can still do it. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not saying you should do that. I've been to the wall several times. I have prayed at the wall. I even stuck a piece of paper in there. Okay. So, I'm not opposed to the idea, but I'm just saying that's what people do. So why do they do that? They say, well, this is the only wall that's left of the temple complex that's still standing. Everything else has been destroyed. And roughly where that Dome of the Rock is about where the temple stood. Let's just say good enough for us, that's where it was. But it's not there anymore. Okay? So that's why the Jews go here. And in fact, ladies, you have to go on this side and the men on that side. Ladies on the right, men on the left. They're divided. They have a little barrier, to keep the ladies out of the men's side and the men out of the ladies' side. It's segregated by gender. That's in Jerusalem. They tended to remain more faithful. They had kind of a revival of following Yahweh, following God. They escaped the wrath of the Assyrians. However, when the Assyrians come, according to the Bible, God spares them. If you remember, they come during the reign of Hezekiah, right? Hezekiah has a tunnel built. I've walked through that tunnel. You can go through the tunnel. It brings water into the city. And then, even though they had the city surrounded, well, a lot of the army died, and they left without taking the city. So they were not carried away. They survived. And then the Assyrians are defeated by the Neo-Babylonians. We're going to talk about that in a moment. It's going to be the Neo-Babylonians, not to be confused with Hammurabi. These are much later, right? In the 6th century BC. 586, the Neo-Babylonians come. They take over the city. This is the time of Daniel, and the lion's den, and his friend Shadrach. Remember him? Meshach? Yes. It's during that time where they take away the elites and they carry them off to Babylon. We read the psalm, it says, by the waters of Babylon, I sat down and cried. We sat down and cried, right? For thee, Zion. Well, anyway, that's Bible stuff. You'll have to read that in the Bible. I recommend it. I recommend the Bible. I do. I just do. I recommend it. Okay. Now later they're going to return. Why? Because they stay faithful. Daniel and his buddies, so look, we're not going to assimilate. We're not going to become Babylonians. We're not going to worship their God. We're not going to do the things they do. And so later, when the Babylonians are defeated by the Persians allow them to return. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about these Assyrians. What do we got? We got 15 minutes, 18 minutes, and we got about 6 slides. We ought to be able to do it if I don't tell you too many stories. Okay, the Assyrians. Here is, that's not a very good, I need to replace that picture. I got a better picture. I keep saying that every time I show this. This is the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III. By the way, somebody in the other class, the Tuesday class, has been to the British Museum. Anybody in here have been to the British Museum? No? Okay. Well, I'll have to ask her. Of course, I won't get to ask her, so she's going to be listening on the video, so I'll ask her via video. Did you see the black obelisk of Shalmaneser? You should have, because that's where it is. It's in the British Museum. And it's about, let's say about 6 feet tall. It's rectangular or almost square. And it has these panels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's about 6 panels on each side. And there's writing in cuneiform up there. That's the style of writing. In there is a picture. You see this? It's kind of hard to see it. The second panel down, there's a guy kneeling. You kind of make that out? In front of another guy. This is the king of Assyria. This is the king of Israel. Not the kind of thing you want to publicize back home. Right? Don't want that on your Instagram feed or whatever. Don't tweet about it. That's a problem today. Everybody tells everything. Sometimes I think, do you really want to tell people this? And then, do people really want to hear it? For example, like some people put a picture like everything they eat. Oh, I'm eating a great hamburger. And then selfie with a hamburger. Okay, I don't know. I'm happy for you. I hope you enjoy your hamburger and you have a great lunch, but I don't really know if I need to know that. Well, it's okay. I don't know. But anyway, that's what people do today. They tell us, sometimes I read some of this stuff on Facebook or whatever, and I think, a lot of people can read this. It's not really your diary. It's not like something you write it and you lock it up and put it in your bedroom and nobody gets to see it. Everybody can see this, and they're going to be able to see it forever. Get that? It's going to be out there. You run for public office in 20 years or whatever, you look for a job, they're going to see this. They're going to look on your Facebook and see what you've been doing, and you come and tell them you're going to be a great employee, and they're going to say, you know what, it doesn't look like it. Well, anyway, just something to keep in mind. That has nothing to do with this class. But maybe you want to censor yourself, self-imposed censorship with some of the stuff you put on social media. That's my only advice. Anyway, I would also give that advice to politicians, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, I'm not really that political, but yeah, you should watch what you say. Now, of course, today, I mean, that's how people get famous. Some people are just famous for being famous. They've done nothing. Yeah, like what if the Kardashians? Well, anyway, hey, by the way, that's in your video. It's in one of your videos. He's going to mention. This guy mentions stuff that I would not mention. So I'll just leave it at that. But he does mention Kim Kardashian and a guy called The Situation. You ever heard of him? Okay. So when you watch the video, remember that. I think that's not the one for this week. That'll be for next week. Anyway, what about the Assyrians? How did we get off on that? How do you guys get me off on this stuff? Anyway, I guess it was my fault. Their capital is at Nineveh, and the Assyrians rise to power through the use of, they have new technology. They have iron weapons, not bronze weapons. Iron weapons are more durable. They're stronger. It's a technological advantage. If you come at me with a bronze sword and I come at you with an iron sword, well, it depends on how good you are with the sword. But if we're both equal, I've got an advantage. Because my iron sword is stronger, it might break your bronze sword, and it's going to keep its edge longer, and so forth. Okay? I can pry with it too. I'm not quite sure how I do that when we're fighting, but let's not think about that. Anyway, iron weapons. They were fierce warriors. The Assyrians were real nasty guys. Let me just put it to you that way. Very cruel. Very nasty. Have you eaten lunch yet? You haven't. Okay, good. So I can tell you some of the stuff they did. If you don't want to hear it, just plug your ears. She's going to plug her ears. That's okay. But she'll never know when we're done. Anyway. Oh, okay. I will tell you some of the cruel tactics since you keep pressing me for them. The Assyrians would, what would they do? They did a lot of things. Has anyone ever said to you, now my mother, I told you some things, maybe last time I told you some things my mother would say, I brought you into this world, I'll take you out of this world. Another thing my mother would say to me occasionally, she would say this, I'm sure your mother would say this, I'm going to skin you alive. Anyone ever heard anybody say that to you? You have. Only one. Okay, there's only two of us in the room that have heard that. I'm going to skin you alive. That means they're really mad at you, right? Now, my mother didn't mean it. My mother never did. I will just confess. My mother never did skin me alive, even though she did say that a few times. The Assyrians did it. Not only did they do it, they got pictures of it. It's on some of their artwork, if you want to call it artwork. What they would do is they would strap a guy, since you wanted to know, I'll tell you. They strap a guy face down on the ground with his legs out and his arms out. And then a couple of guys come up to around the shoulders and they cut around the shoulders, and then he grab a hold of it and they pull it off all the way down past his rear end, all the way down to his legs. There are, yes, I'm not showing you anything, but there are depictions of guys grabbing, the skin and the guy staked out. Yeah, it's on their artwork. It's called, instead of skinning alive, the more technical term is flaying. F-L-A-Y-I-N-G. Flaying, or to flay. To flay is to peel somebody's skin off, I guess while they're alive. I guess you could do when they're dead. Kind of beats the point. Anyway, and then they would leave the guy staked out like that on the ground. in the sun, with the insects, and well, you can imagine. So that's something that the Assyrians would do, a very slow and cruel death. You might agree with me, right? Another thing they would do, they would often decapitate people. They would take the heads and stack them up in pyramids. Like put, 8 of them at the bottom and then 6, and stack them up, and put that in front of the gates of the city. They would take, sometimes the skin of the person and nail it to the wall of the gate or the city. They would take people and hang them from the walls. They invented a thing called, impaling. What they did is they took a pole, like a big wooden pole, maybe like the size of a telephone pole, maybe a little bit smaller, and they sharpened the end of it. They would lift the guy up, and they would jam it down under his rib cage, like right about in here. And they'd leave him hanging like this. I mean, they have depictions of that too. She's going to look it up later. They have depictions of that too, where the guy's just kind of hanging there. Not much he can do at that point, and he's going to die, but he'll die. Impaling. Oh, she's writing that down. Flaying and impaling. Okay. Flaying and impaling and decapitation. Yes, these are all things they did. Now, why did the Assyrians do this? Well, they were nasty guys. But also, it's easier if people are afraid of you. If people are really afraid of you, a lot of them just don't know how to mess with you, right? The Assyrians like that. If you were just afraid of me and we show up and you surrender, fine. That's easier for us. Right? If you don't surrender, well, we'll make an example of you. So when you do that to a few cities and now you're coming up to the next city, and the cities here, the Assyrians are coming, they might just open up the gates and say, hey, welcome, fellas. You like something to eat? That kind of thing. All right? So they were very cruel. Now, Shalmaneser III is in the 9th century, 859 to 824. He actually there has the Jehu, the king of Israel, giving him tribute. I'm telling too many stories because I've only gone through one screen now, and I've only got 9 minutes left. I can expand this stuff as long as I need. You know what I'm saying? So I got to speed it up. But anyway, that's why this is called the Black Obelisk. That's why a lot of people are interested in it. And it's got this depiction of him in that second screen. And basically it tells the tribute money that he is going to give. Tribute of Jehu, son of Omri, silver, gold, golden safu, a bowl, golden vase, golden goblets, pitchers of gold, tin. Tin was an important commodity. Strong wood to make spears and that sort of thing. In the hand of the king, I received from him. So this is what the king of Assyria is saying. Here's what the king of Israel gave me. And because he gave me that, okay, he gets to live and he gets to keep being king of Israel. Again, not something that you want to just tell back home. The one king is under the thumb of the other king. And when they finally decided to not do that anymore, that's when they came in and just destroyed him. Okay, that's why they got carried away. That's what happens later. Okay, so here is a map that shows us, all this sort of green color. I'll call it green. It's sort of a beige and a green. The green is Persia. We'll talk about Persia later. But the Assyrians are in that dotted sort of red line here. See this dotted thing here? All the way down to Egypt. You see that? The dotted line is Assyria. So there you can see the capital at Nineveh. You can see Mesopotamia, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt all come under the control of the Assyrians by roughly 700 BC. All right, you can look at that later. I think your book has a similar map. The Assyrians. Let me mention a few more of these before we have to go. How about Tiglath-Pileser? You see, you're looking for names for your children. Or maybe your pets. I don't know. How about Tiglath-Pileser? I guarantee you he'll be the only kid in the kindergarten named Tiglath-Pileser. I'm pretty sure of it. I think I can guarantee it. Especially if you call him Tiglath-Pileser the Third. I mean, that just cuts down the chances that there's going to be, it might be a Tiglath-Pileser, but not the Third, right? Anyway, Tiglath-Pileser the Third. Or I call him TP3 for short. TP3. And it's not that kind of TP. It's Tiglath-Pileser. Okay. He will come and take control of Palestine. He's mentioned in the Bible, by the way, under the name Pul, P-U-L, Pul. Now, in more modern, that's like the King James. But if you look at like NIV or some of the other earlier or later, more recent translations, they probably just call him Tiglath. Right? So Tiglath is a biblical name you can name your child, your son. I recommend a son, not a daughter, but that's up to you. Tiglath. You call him Tig, Tiggy, Tigster, Tiggerino. You got a lot of names for him. Baron von Tighausen. That could be your nickname for him. All right, now he seizes, Shalmaneser will seize, that's the next one we're going to talk about. Shalmaneser the fifth, he's the one who seizes Samaria, and he's the one who deports the 10 tribes, the people of Israel, during his reign. We're going to jump down to Sennacherib. I think that's a great name for a kid. Sennacherib. Sennacherib, 704 to 681. Sennacherib is going to come down along the coastline, and he's going to attack the fortified city of Lachish. He's also the one that attacks Jerusalem. These depictions that are on here, up in the corner, is something called the Taylor Prism, which is an Assyrian account of this attack. You can read in Kings of the account as recorded in the Bible. And then this picture that's here, this drawing, is actually from the palace. It at one time was in the palace in Nineveh. If you want to see it now, it's in the British Museum. You got to go looking for it, but it's there. And it's a famous bas-relief. And it's a room probably about the size of this room, let's say roughly, all around the walls. They've got depictions of how they took the city of Lachish. That's how important they thought taking that city was. He decorated a room in his palace. And by the way, this guy seated here, if you take a look on this kind of high chair there, his throne, that is Sennacherib right there. So, for this event of taking of Lachish, we have the Assyrian records, we have the biblical records, we have this artwork, we also have the city itself of Lachish, which has been excavated. We've got all kinds of sources that document that this really happened and how it happened. All right? As you can probably tell, I like archaeology. I also teach classes about archaeology. I got one called Archaeology in the Ancient Near East, History and Archaeology in the Ancient Near East. I'll probably be offering. And we go in a lot more detail of this kind of thing, if you're interested in it. Now let's move on to the Neo-Babylonians, because we got 4 minutes left and I got 3 slides. So I'm going to have to go fast. You can review it again on YouTube if you run out of time. The Neo-Babylonians, or sometimes they're called the Chaldeans in older sources. Most famous of these is the king Nebuchadnezzar. I'm sure you've heard of him, because he's predominantly mentioned in the Old Testament. He establishes an empire which defeats the Assyrians, and he takes over Mesopotamia, and he then will eventually come into Palestine and conquer Jerusalem. And he will then take those captives back to Babylon, like Daniel and others. Okay, that's in 586 BC. Nebuchadnezzar was very famous for his hanging gardens of Babylon. There's 7 ancient wonders of the world. The pyramids that we talked about on Tuesday when you weren't here, you can listen about it. That's one of the 7 wonders. The hanging gardens of Babylon are the others. All the other 5 are Hellenistic things, or later, after the time of Alexander. So this is the time then of Daniel, time of Nebuchadnezzar. This is a very short-lived empire, by the way. Very short-lived. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, by the way, his wife was from the mountains, and she wanted mountains and very flat there, and so he built this for her. According to the accounts, it was elaborate with terraces and waterfalls and fountains and plants and trees. That's what people do for their wives. Right? So keep that in mind. If you're a wife or future wife or husband or future husband. Persians! We got 2 more screens and we got 2 more minutes. So let me just put this up here. And you may have to go look on YouTube to get this if you don't have time to copy this all down. Because I want to finish and get to the next screen. Persians then, 539 to 331. Their capital is at Susa. The most famous leader we want to mention is Cyrus II, also known as Cyrus the Great. This is the name you might have heard because the Jews were very grateful to Cyrus because he freed them. He freed the Jews. When he came in and conquered Babylon by diverting the river, by the way, he diverted the river and then he went into the city. The walls went all the way around the city, but the river went under the wall. So he went upstream and his men, they diverted the river and then they went in on the riverbed underneath to attack the city. When he takes it, he will free the Jews. His son Cambyses will go and conquer Egypt. And then the next generation down, Darius, is the guy who actually goes into what today would be Turkey and makes contact with the Greeks and takes over Ionia. And when we talked about Greece, we'll talk about Ionia. And so that's the connection with the Greeks. All right. Let me just show you one more screen. And this is our last screen. Okay. The Persians' religion is Zoroastrianism. It's good versus evil, dark versus light. You think, George Lucas invented that. No, he ripped off the Zoroastrians. They have fire temples and all that kind of stuff. They worship the Ahura Mazda. By the way, another Persian leader, and I think this is my candidate for your kid's name. This is a great name. I've never met anyone with this name. Xerxes. You can call him Zerk, right? It's got 2 X's in it. You never find a name with 2 X's except maybe Xerox. But Xerxes, a very powerful name. He is the husband, by the way, of Esther. Remember they had a beauty contest, or what do you want to call it, the Miss Persia contest? I don't know what you call it. But anyway, he was looking for a wife, and then basically he ends up picking Esther, right? You can read about that in the book of Esther. But he is mentioned also in the Bible in that context, and their palace, Persian palace in Susa. Okay. Woo! Any questions? Remember, Sunday night, definitely do the quiz by Sunday night. The other assignments are due by Sunday night. There's a couple of video things, a couple of sets of terms. I'll be putting more stuff up. I'll post something. I'll try to email you the sort of explanation about this browser. But remember, be presentable, as my mother used to say. Be presentable when you take your quiz. That is, no people can see you. All right. Take care now. And remember, Friday night's the party if you want to come.